Good morning, buenos días. This is our meeting of the American Chamber of Commerce of Panama, a Trade and Investment Committee. The Trade and Investment Committee gathers several of the companies of the American Chamber of Commerce in questions. And also, of course, to those that are here physically present with us. I would like to thank the sponsors of the American Chamber of Commerce, especially the platform sponsors, those being 3M, AES, Chevron, Johnson & Johnson, LHH, Banco Bastise, and Minera Panama. So this is sort of like a master class. We'll straight into our presentations. But first, there will be an introduction about what is the Harrisburg University of Science and Technology and what the opportunities are for Latin Americans wishing to study in the United States. Thank you about that. You can either pick up the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. My name is Kevin Evans. I serve as the director of Harrisburg University in Latin America. And before we give the mic to Andrew Packer, I just want to give a quick context of the university so you understand where we're coming from and what we're doing here in the area. So Harrisburg University is a young institution. It was actually a joint venture between the Mayor's Office of Pennsylvania, the Mayor's Office of and the business community in the region. And the purpose was twofold: to confront a long-term shortage of human capital in the areas of science, technology, mathematics, and engineering in the region that was hampering advancement and competitiveness for business. The second is also to enhance representation, both gender and ethnic, in the region as well. So that's how it started about 20 years ago. Today, it continues to be a STEM focus: science, technology, and math, with just under 7,000 students from over 100 countries. It's private, nonprofit, and it's located in the state capital of the university. State capital of Pennsylvania. That impacts the things we do. It's accredited both at the institution level as well as the program level, and we've been recognized nationally for quality in education and science and technology. Just for a concrete representation, these are our undergraduate offerings at the main campus in Harrisburg. While we have courses like English literature, history, and things of that sort, all of our degrees are in the areas of science, technology, and mathematics. This trend continues at the master's level, as well as the PhD level. So all of our degrees, from undergraduate to master's to PhD, are in the areas of science, technology, and mathematics. Now, for the postgraduate level, the master's and the PhD, for the last more than a decade, we've immersed. We have been delivering our education in a hybrid manner. And what I mean by that is students connect online with professors, and then they come in from around the country and meet face to face. Why do we do that? Accessibility. We found most of our students in the graduate level working. We found out that combination of flexibility, the virtual, and personal touch with the in-person classes provided the best combination for our student body. We've done that. What happened? That converted the university from a regional institution, where it was founded, to a national one. Now, professors commonly have students from all over the country who are attending the university. In addition to the traditional education, our undergraduate and postgraduate programs, we also are very active in research. And research has different flavors. You have some that are more focused on the theoretical, which is very important, but others, like us, we have to go on the world. That comes from our founding. We were founded through a joint venture with our business community, and we're very close to the state government, and that leads us more to a practical applied type of research, and that's what we do. And just like our academic programs, all of our areas in these research centers show that whilst diverse, they still are focused in science, technology, and mathematics. So we have our traditional education, our research, and here is another aspect I always like to point out, is our human capacity building, our professional education. Now, that's not unique to any university, but what I think what Harrisburg University brings is our emphasis. Based on our founding, since the majority of our board of trustees are entrepreneurs and business owners, we have a special sensitivity and focus on professional education because we believe in the diversity of our student body. Not everyone's coming out of high school to go to school. Some people are working, some people have kids, they have a family. So we need to be sensitive to that diverse student, diverse set of learners, and we have adjusted our education to do that. What I mean, well, we don't believe that our education is limited to a classroom or a building. We like to take our education out to where our students are, and also respecting that diverse set. So we have training programs, seminars, diploma models, and we also have master classes like today with Andrew Hacker. This team is the busiest team at Harrisburg. They never stop because our group of learners is quite broad. We like to tend to them. What we're doing in Panama, we'll continue this training in all of our forms of education. We're here. We're located in the City of Knowledge. And in the City of Knowledge, we're offering right now our master's programs in analytics, cybersecurity, and project management. Those are available now. We have students there. We follow the same program. It's a hybrid program. You interact with our professors. And instead of you and everybody in this region flying to Harrisburg, we have invested in send our professors here, just like we brought Andrew Hacker here. Why do we do that? Same thing we did when we started our hybrid, accessibility. And what is the result for those who want to take advantage of our master's program? You're able to get a U.S. accredited degree without leaving the region. The diploma doesn't say Harrisburg University, Latin America. It says Harrisburg University. In addition to our master's, we also have our diploma models and our master classes that we will work here. And we'll be extending with our PhD program also. And that's all I want to do before I hand it over to Andrew Hacker. Thank you for your attention. Andrew.
Thank you, Kevin. We posted the contact data for the panel program.
Yes, well, we can provide that information after.
Okay, very well. Thank you very much. And so now we move on to the main presentation by Andrew Hacker, a cybersecurity expert from Harrisburg University and the founder of spin-off ThoughtAI, which is a novel artificial intelligence platform leveraging patented self-aware information, complex adaptive systems, and blockchain. Mr. Hacker is the former Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where he implemented and improved cybersecurity programs statewide, created enterprise security strategies, standards, and policies, enhanced overall application security, and was responsible for risk management and compliance across the Commonwealth. And well, it's been this whole week here in Panama, and I think that we're privileged at the American Chamber to have them here with us. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to you.
Just ask you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction. Buenos dias. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Andrew Hacker. I'm the cybersecurity expert in residence at Harrisburg University. I've been with Harrisburg University for about 7 years, and as mentioned prior to that, I was the Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So that was a very interesting position. A lot of pressure. Certainly, I think any position in cybersecurity, there's a lot on the line. At the state of Pennsylvania, the citizenship there is 13 million. So we were actually responsible for the information, the personal information, and all the records for 13 million citizens. And Pennsylvania's got a pretty strict regulatory set of laws that dictate essentially what happens if any of that information is breached. There's a strict notification policy that if, for example, a company is breached and some of the information from a private citizen in Pennsylvania is stolen, they're required to do notification to that citizen, as well as also provide 1 year of basically credit monitoring. And that can actually be quite expensive. I think costs for 1 year of credit monitoring can be anywhere from $60 to $100. So if you do the math, 13 million times 100 is actually quite a large negative impact there. And also prior to that, I worked for the company Verisign, which basically was the infrastructure for all of the encryption technology for web servers across the internet. And I actually, at one point, I managed to actually see the servers that provided those encryption keys, basically for the entire internet. And Verisign actually had it in a closet. And I asked them, so how do you guys keep these servers secure? And they basically said to me, which was kind of funny, they said, well, nobody knows where they are.
Yeah.
Right? And that was kind of funny to me. And that's kind of when I really knew I wanted to get into cybersecurity. But this is great. And I said, maybe you should, put something to protect that power cord in case someone kicks it over. I'm also the founder and CEO of ThoughtAI. We're actually doing some unique things with information and how information is managed. Essentially, we're building artificial intelligence from the ground up. So instead of the current traditional model, which is we take a machine learning model and we basically throw massive amounts of data at it, we actually take a little bit of the artificial intelligence model and embed it directly into the data. So all the data is encrypted. The data is actually self-aware. In fact, the data can sense its environment. It can have simple rules embedded within each piece of information, which allow it to actually make decisions on its own. One of the interesting use cases we have is we can create data that actually knows if it's been stolen. So it's got enough smarts in it that if a piece of data, let's say, is a piece of healthcare information that was created in Pennsylvania, let's say, and someone breaks in, steals that information, and the data winds up in a foreign country. So the data is actually smart enough to know and maybe see its environment and say, well, I'm not in Pennsylvania anymore. So I've probably been stolen. Let me check what I'm supposed to do. So maybe it can do one of two things. It can say, I'm going to notify somebody. Or two, it could say, well, I'm just going to delete myself. Right? There's a lot of interesting possibilities there. So why do we need cybersecurity? My next slide, I'm going to show a brief video that's a collection of some interesting new things that are happening within the world of technology. And hopefully it comes through okay on the stream. So.
Okay, do it. Do it. Kill the engine.
So we're killing the engine right now.
It says park sensor. Actually, can't accelerate.
I stomped on the gas, but the Jeep slowed to a crawl.
It says 43 miles an hour, but I'm not going that fast.
I turned on my hazard lights, but I was still stuck in the right lane with no shoulder to escape onto.
Guys, I'm stuck on the highway.
30 seconds.
Gmail.com.
Jessica gets my personal email address.
Now, if I needed to add our older daughter on our account so she could call in and make changes, how would I need to go about doing that? You would have to send me a secure PIN through a text message? Yeah, well, the thing is, I don't think I'll be able to receive a text message if I'm on the phone. Shh, shh, shh. Oh, I'm not on there either? So I thought when we got married, he added...
His videos of not Tom Cruise have been viewed millions of times online.
We made these silly videos where it looked like Tom doing these silly things. He was doing a magic trick. He was playing golf, eating a lollipop. And somehow people really enjoyed those and they went viral all over the world. To create something like this.
I just clicked open and I'm at the site now.
Here's what the IT guy doesn't realize. By clicking that link, he's just given David full access to his computer.
Whoa, okay, that's weird. I just hit it and it works. It seems like it's working fine now. Awesome. I don't know what you did, man, but I really appreciate the help.
Hey, no problem. That was easy.
That was it?
We're on this computer right now.
After their stunt on the highway, Chris and Charlie still wanted to show me a couple of other tricks. Below a certain speed, they can control the Jeep's steering as long as it's in reverse, pop its locks, mess with the speedometer, and, of course, disable the brakes.
Okay, hold on tight. Hold on. Oh,
He's not getting out of that.
Okay, so there were a lot of interesting things, excuse me, going on in that video. We'll start with the fact that a remote person with a laptop was able to connect to that 2015 Jeep. So that was about 7 years ago. And that's about the time when automobile manufacturers, really utilized digital technology to run cars. Previously, say in the old days, everything that you did in the car was physically essentially connected to either the brakes or the steering column. But what's changed now, and you've seen in that video, is that all of the things that you do in your car have sensors, right? So when you push in the brakes, there's a sensor that understands how far in that brake is being pressed and converts that to digital information, which actuates the brakes. Now, the big problem with that is anyone with a computer that can connect to the computer system that's in that Jeep can actually, change all kinds of things. So they were actually able to disable the brakes. And that's, as just a general person who uses cars every day, that's pretty concerning. And if I'm driving down the road and suddenly someone can, turn my engine off or, stop the car from braking, it's a big concern. So why is that changing? So, digital is everywhere. And certainly that's nothing new, but the fact of the matter is that the digital world is becoming so integrated into the physical world. So all of the things that we do, opening doors, our banking, getting your money, getting access to your money, maybe even your food. There are smart refrigerators now that have computers in them. So, on the positive side, they claim that they can actually sense what you have in your refrigerator and even potentially, send a message to the grocery store to make your shopping list, right? So that's great. But the flip side of that is that they have a computer. And anything, any device, no matter what it is, if it has a computer in it, it's susceptible to vulnerabilities. Those are, security holes that basically make it easy for an attacker to take control of that system. The other thing about that video was that we've seen some examples of just how easy it is for attackers to take advantage of people's perceptions to get them to do things that they shouldn't do that can lead to cybersecurity breaches. They're very good at their job. And the other thing is that there's a lot of very advanced technology out there. You saw the deep fakes that, just an actor that kind of looked a little bit like Tom Cruise was able to, take pictures of Tom Cruise essentially and have the video system he's using basically make him look exactly like Tom Cruise. Right, so these deepfakes are not only, extremely good at doing this with video, they're also really good at doing it with audio as well. We could call an IT department if we had enough, maybe even a voicemail message from a CEO, right? If an attacker was able to take that and then basically type in some text, they could play it back for an IT person and they wouldn't know the difference that it really wasn't a seatbelt. So all of this boils down to the fact that cybersecurity is in fact foundational technology. What I mean by that is that a lot of the new and the futuristic and the advanced technologies that we have today wouldn't exist if it wasn't for cybersecurity. Cybersecurity creates boundaries and rules that the internet didn't initially have when it was first created. You know, in the physical world, we have rules, right? Gravity is probably the easiest one to use that as an example because we know there's gravity. We know if we jump up, we're going to land back on our feet, right? And that's a given that never changes. So these physical laws we're used to dealing with, we're comfortable with them, we know how they operate. In the digital world, there are no rules, essentially. The internet was created to be a transportation system for information. But the early creation of the internet didn't, envision or didn't predict that there was going to be such great complexity in all of these new technologies out there. So there really are no rules based in, rules like, financialization and monetization of different information. And there certainly are no cyber security boundaries built into the internet. So that means that we actually need to really take cybersecurity seriously. An example, in the banking system, we really wouldn't have a banking system if there was no cybersecurity. It would be a free-for-all, right? A perfect example of how information in the digital world can affect real world. There was an incident about 4 or 5 years ago where the Twitter feed for the White House was hacked. And somebody was able to post a message that said the White House had been blown up. And they might have even posted an image that showed this. And what happened? Well, the stock market, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, crashed 10%. It was a flash crash. It crashed 10% in milliseconds before anybody realized that the message was, in fact, not real. So it just goes to show you that something, as small as a tweet on Twitter can have $1 trillion effect on global markets, right? So some common themes in cybersecurity. I've been in cybersecurity since about the year 2000. The internet had kind of just come out, I think, 5, 6 years previously in the 90s. So at its beginnings, cybersecurity really wasn't even really well understood in. I think, it was kind of in its infancy stages. But, as things have progressed, particularly since, I've been in the industry about 22 years now, cybersecurity industry and technology has matured significantly. One of the things that's changed is since people didn't really understand cybersecurity, they didn't understand how large the negative impacts of bad cybersecurity or breaches could be. A lot of organizations and a lot of technology professionals kind of looked at the chance that they were going to get breached and said, well, I'm going to roll the dice. Cybersecurity was basically seen as a necessary evil. Basically like, let's just say car insurance, right? You pay your car insurance and what are the chances that I'm going to get into an accident? So these individuals basically said, well, I'll take my chances. And the fact is that, and what has kind of helped mature the cybersecurity industry is that breaches do happen. In fact, they happen a lot. And there are a lot of major consequences when organizations do get breached. So, the cybersecurity professionals started saying, well, it's really not if you're ever going to get breached, it's when you're going to get breached and are you prepared for it, right? So that's, the key message there is to always have a plan, always, understand your organization's cybersecurity posture. Cybersecurity should be a continual process throughout, the whole life cycle of not only your business processes, but your technology processes. Cybersecurity is a mindset. So awareness is very key. It's very important that all individuals, all business partners are aware that you have this cybersecurity policy. And even just the, simple things like what not to click on, right, is extremely important for any organization. The bad guys only have to be right once. The good guys have to be right all the time. And when I worked for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I was always asked, well, what keeps you up at night? What are the main things? I said, well, I know pretty much everything, right? And there's a lot more attackers than defenders. I don't know if there's an actual ratio, but I would say it's quite high. Let's say 1,000 or 10,000 to 1. And the other thing about the progression of technology is that, it helps the good guys out and certainly makes life better for all of us that we've got such advanced technology like artificial intelligence, makes our lives easier. The bad thing is that the bad guys have access to that exact same technology. So all the advancements and all the automation that we can do on our end, they're also doing as well. There are actually there's a whole underground economy. There's even like an Amazon and an eBay for cybersecurity criminals, where when they steal data, they can actually go sell that information to the highest bidder. One record of protected health information usually goes for about $2,000 to $5,000. And that is the type of information that's actually the most valuable to attackers. Credit cards used to be the most valuable, but it's actually pretty easy now to report your credit card stolen and get issued a new one. I think, credit card companies must go through credit card numbers like candy, I guess. And the other thing to keep in mind is there's no such thing as 100% secure, right? It's almost impossible without unlimited resources to completely secure your environment. So what that requires is a very good understanding of where the valuable assets are in your organization to ensure that you focus on them first. So as I said, there's a lot of progress in the cybersecurity industry. Cybersecurity is definitely beginning to be taken seriously. It used to be back in the early days that IT professionals and chief information officers really did not want to talk to the security guys. The security guys were kind of seen as the bad guys, right? We don't want to talk to them. They're just going to tell us stuff we don't want to hear. But that conversation is definitely getting easier. And certainly from a funding perspective, when we started out, we were lucky if we got 0.25% of the IT budget. So at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, for the Governor's Office of Administration, the CIO there had about $100 million per year technology. I think cybersecurity was lucky if we got $500,000 to do anything, right? We think that's changing. There's recommendations of at least 3 to 5% of an IT budget, and really that's actually pretty cheap. I mean, if you think about some of the impacts of what happens when there is a breach, the average cost of a breach in the United States is actually $8 million, and that's the average. Okay, and that includes restoring services, getting things from backups, potentially paying ransomware, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next coming slides. Dealing with legal fees and all those kinds of things. Even though there's a growing number of cybersecurity professionals because of the awareness, there's still a huge shortage globally, about 1 million person shortage of cybersecurity professionals. In general, cybersecurity maturity is our it is maturing. I will say a quick word about privacy. The fact of the matter is that there are so many devices out there. Computers, and when I say computers, I just mean processing capability. It's pretty much embedded in almost anything these days. TVs, light bulbs, certainly phones, the cars, the front door locks, refrigerators. So then there's a couple things with that. One is it dramatically improves, or it basically makes larger all of the different areas where vulnerabilities can happen, right? And there's been times where attackers have used someone's refrigerator as a launch point to point at Amazon and break into a company. The other thing I'll say is that probably one of the biggest vulnerabilities that are out there is our phones, right? Our phones have access to so much information about us, essentially our whole lives. sit on our phones. Those phones have many, many sensors, 30, 40 sensors in them, everywhere from your GPS, where you move, what you do, who your friends are, who you're calling. And the latest thing within the last 5 years or so, our phones are definitely listening to us. I'll tell you a quick story about when I discovered this. I was actually watching a movie with my wife. It was your common action movie. And I think there was a tidal wave about to crash into California. And the heroes got on a helicopter and flew from New York to California. And it was a small helicopter. And in my head, I thought, well, that doesn't seem right. I can't imagine that a helicopter can fly from New York to California. So I asked my wife, I said, what do you think the range of a helicopter is? And I went to Google on my cell phone and I started typing, what is the? And the autopopulate for my first suggested search was, what is the range of a helicopter? Now, I had never looked at for anything on a helicopter on that phone previously, as far as I knew. So what that meant is that the phone heard what I was saying, converted my speech into text, it tagged keywords, helicopter range, and sent that up to Google's big, huge data center. Went through the processing and came back and made that my first suggested search link, all within probably 5 milliseconds. And, that was a kind of an awakening moment for me. We've always kind of known that these technologies are getting more and more powerful, but I just didn't realize that it was quite at that level. I asked other people and nobody really, thought it was a big deal, but eventually, probably a year or two later, the rest of the world kind of caught up to it and started realizing it. Those companies got severely criticized. They said, oh, well, we're not really listening. We only listen if you say, okay, Google, or you say Alexa, right? The fact is they have to listen even just to hear the trigger word, right? But yeah, they are in fact listening, and really you should, especially in the business world, any significantly important meetings, I recommend having a basket by the door and not bring your cell phones in. If there's something you don't want somebody outside of your organization here. Now, granted, Google and Amazon should be good stewards of our information and protect everything. But the fact of the matter is, once that data is out there, it's out there. Google's whole business model is based on the value of the information that they collect. And they definitely and do indeed sell it to data brokers, to advertisers, right? I'm sure, if you search for one thing on one website, you go somewhere else, you're going to see that product pop up. It's a huge network of that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the interesting terms here. This is just kind of a, general sampling of lots of interesting cybersecurity related words. I'm sure you're familiar with quite a few of these, some of them a little bit more technical. One of the big things I want to talk about, spyware, phishing, malware, and also ransomware. Ransomware is not necessarily new, but it's become a lot more prevalent these days, especially with the advancement of Bitcoin and blockchain technologies. Now, I'm a big proponent of blockchain technologies. Blockchains provide a lot of the structure I talked about that was missing on the internet. It allows you to, basically memorialize transactions so that you can have access to them, and leverage that blockchain to do a lot of interesting things. But there is Bitcoin. It's a cryptocurrency. And a lot of the positive things about Bitcoin, I guess it's true for any technology, right? It can be used for good and for bad. So ransomware is essentially just like it sounds. Criminals or the bad guys break into a company. They find the most valuable asset within that company, traditionally, individual data sets, and they lock that data and then basically require that company to send them Bitcoin, for example, or they won't send them the key to unlock it. A perfect example of this, a Colonial Pipeline is a refined gasoline pipeline on the east coast of the United States. They suffered a ransomware attack, and the pipeline was actually shut down for quite a few days. What did this do? I mean, it took that whole service offline, the whole East Coast. So this is critical infrastructure that was affected by this ransomware attack. It doubled the price of gasoline for a couple of days before they were able to get it back online. And, my first question was, well, why is it that this data set was so important for the functioning of something so critical like that? Why didn't you have your data backed up? Why didn't you have a plan on how to handle this type of thing? So I think it was a big wake-up call, for a lot of organizations. It's definitely something to be aware of. So some other terminology to know. Obviously, we know about attacks and attackers and defense and defenders. I'm sure most of you are familiar with two-factor authentication these days. When we first started deploying two-factor authentication at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there was a lot of resistance. Users said, well, it's too complex, or too complicated for me. It slows me down. Why do I have to do this? I have enough trouble remembering all my passwords, and now you're asking me to type in a PIN after I type in my password. It was an inconvenience, but it's actually a requirement these days, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But people do accept it now. In fact, I would say most, probably 60 to 70% of critical type websites do employ two-factor authentication. Some other things. So talk a little bit more about devices and the fact that they have computers in them. There's a whole industry called Internet of Things, which is basically, let's put a computer chip in everything we can. And the increase in the number of deployment of those devices year over year is staggering. It's 50 million, it's 50 billion in 5 years, right? So there's actually, I think they said it's something like, eventually there will be, 1 million devices for every one person, on the planet, and those numbers are huge. So what that does is it basically, it makes things incredibly more complicated and a lot harder to defend against. So the big thing with cybersecurity, the most important thing, is managing risk. And as I said before, it used to be kind of a necessary evil, but I think now organizations are starting to understand that cybersecurity is actually, in fact, a very important piece of any corporation's risk management policy. There are lots of risk management frameworks. The United States and the EU have done a lot of work with providing standards and frameworks, and NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, released a cybersecurity framework that's extremely valuable. Sort of an instruction and how-to on how to get a risk management and cybersecurity framework in place of your organization. But you got to start somewhere. A lot of questions I get is, where do I start? How do I do this? I don't even know where to start. I think the big answer, it's how do you eat an elephant? The joke is one bite at a time, right? So you have to start somewhere. Even if you just have a declaration, a one-pager that you can send out to folks in your organization, say, we will be starting a cybersecurity framework and policy for an organization. That's the best place to start. The second big piece is, know your assets. So computational time is increasing significantly, exponentially. So exponentially means that the curve goes straight up like this, right? It means it's actually beyond the comprehensions of humans to actually understand sometimes. Things is, you see, we talked about two-factor authentication. Almost all passwords these days can be cracked instantly. Even one with a number of 10 characters in it, it's numbers only, right? But this curve is, this is already a couple years old. I bet you that whole red place in there too is now probably instantly perfect, right? So, as I said, have a plan. Organizations really can't afford to do nothing, right? Rolling the dice doesn't really cut anything. And another big piece is know what you are protecting. That's one of the first steps in cybersecurity, is to really understand what are the valuable assets in your organization. Is it a supply chain? Is it a business process? Is it in fact a data set or a set of data sets? Is it your customer information, right? So all these things, need to be inventoried, and that in itself is not even easy because, there's a thing called data sprawl, right? We've got data in one place, and we back it up in another place. We might have third-party contractors come in and use their laptop to do development. Do they have our data on their laptops before they take their laptop home and leave it in their car, and maybe the car gets broken into and it gets stolen, right? So these are all the kinds of things that you have to identify. And certainly, one of the biggest things is know what you're going to do when you get attacked before you do. Because once you get attacked, you're really going to be in a difficult position to try to come up with a response. So have a response, have a plan in place ahead of time. Build relationships with non-technology peers, your legal teams, human resources for awareness training, and certainly awareness is critical. Everybody needs to know the basics of cybersecurity, right? If you have a cybersecurity team, and technology and the specifics, but everybody needs to know that they shouldn't be clicking on emails or links, regardless of how convincing they might sound. And certainly, cybersecurity criminals are very good at finding the weakest link, whatever that is, whether it's a technology vulnerability, whether it's a human vulnerability, right? And the human vulnerability is I think, the easiest to exploit because humans, their brains work in certain ways, and there are all kinds of ways that we can kind of, fool people into thinking that things are legitimate by using all the information on their social profiles and maybe contact lists from within an organization. And a big thing is too, this is called zero trust. It's basically, we start with the assumption that we don't trust anything and then kind of work up from there. So we make whatever it is kind of prove that we should trust it. This goes with phone conversations, emails, but it even does go with technology. An interesting thing is even as cybersecurity professionals, we trust that a computer that we buy brand new from any computer vendor is going to be secure. But that's not always the case. And I won't mention any company names, but about 7 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, there was a computer company that shipped, one of their big servers. It had had malware, at the most basic chipset at the base layer of that computer. So all of these servers could be broken into through this flaw. And that kind of shook the cybersecurity world a little bit too, because you kind of have to start somewhere with some assumptions that we can trust certain things, right? Before we can actually even build, a cybersecurity strategy. But if you can't trust the things that you thought you could trust, that makes it even more difficult. So, as I said before, there's a huge shortage of cybersecurity professionals out there. And this is evidenced by the fact that a couple of years ago, and even still today, cybersecurity analysts, even lower levels, is one of the fastest growing salaries in the United States by occupation. Interestingly enough, data science is the second. So you can kind of see a little bit of a correlation there. Certainly data is sort of the new oil on the internet. Organizations are really, the hackers understood it, I think, right? Because they've been stealing the information and selling it. I think organizations are really starting to understand that data is where all the value is in the organization. As I said, understanding what you're protecting. Surgical approach is always better. Put the most protection at the highest value information and kind of work down from there. Always have cybersecurity embedded through everything you do. This is a classic example here. A lot of cases, organizations will kind of have cybersecurity as an afterthought. They kind of think of it as more of a check or a certification at the end of a process. So the problem with this is if you've got a $50 million project that takes 2 years, you go through requirements, developers develop it, and then after 18 months, you say, okay, we're going to start a cybersecurity audit of that code. Well, it better have been developed perfectly, because if there are any cybersecurity flaws in it, and there's 2 months to go before it needs to be launched, what are you going to do, right? The fact is, cybersecurity planning should be, and secure coding should be part of the process all the way from day one. We talked a little bit about major breaches. The fact iterated by Verizon is that less than 5% of all breaches actually get reported. So the big thing about these breaches is the impact, and these are, every time I go and I try to refresh my page of what the major breaches are, I never have a problem finding them because they continue to happen all the time. But these numbers are huge. TJ Maxx was a classic one, 45 million credit cards. The one I talked the most about is Target. For a couple of reasons, huge breach, 110 million credit cards. The big thing about Target was the bad guys were on their systems for over a year before they even discovered what was happening. Another interesting thing about Target was although they might have had good cybersecurity policy, the attackers actually came in through one of their contractors, an HVAC company that did their heating and cooling systems. So somebody broke into that company because the credentials and the login information for Target were at that contractor. They basically jumped into Target. The other piece is how huge the impact on Target was. Their stock price dropped 40%, and they're a multi-billion-dollar company. $100 billion, I don't know the exact number, but think about what 40% represents for somebody like Target, and they did recover. Half of their board was fired, their CEO was fired, their CIO was fired, their CISO was not fired. Probably because you probably have been complaining about things for a while. So, and I think that was kind of the turnkey moment when a lot of organizations saw what happened to Target and said, "Oh, yeah, this stuff's serious. So we should really start taking a look at this. We don't want to be that." I was mentioning before how deep fakes are huge. This is the article about mimicking the CEO's voice. So, maybe break into a system. Maybe even try to get financial information. Pretty big deal. So there are a lot of exponential technologies. I mentioned Internet of Things. There's weaponized AI. Automated hacking infrastructures, AI bots. GPT-3 is a huge deal these days, and that is that language technology is getting so sophisticated. I mentioned our phones listening, being able to, understand, classify, and tag what I say instantly, right, without me training it, and in multi-languages. But GPT-3 is essentially a language model that was trained something like $10 or $20 million in computing power to train this model, and it's so sophisticated that you can actually give it 5 sentences, and it can create a report out of that. This is actually an example. These articles were actually written by GPT-3, and I was corrected. There is part of a process, so there's actually feedback and editing between GPT-3 and the writer. But you read this article and it talks all about GPT-3, and the last paragraph says, "Me, the author, I did not write this. GPT-3 model did." So, what do you think that means for social engineering attacks? Right? If you've got an AI model that's, calling all of your personnel every time. Ooh, good, awesome. It just makes things so much more difficult. Artificial intelligence is extremely powerful. It's also extremely fragile. And granted, the technology is progressing more and more. It's getting more robust. I did have a quick slide that I jumped over where artificial intelligence, even still today, is generally very good at a very narrow band of things it can do. So we've got artificial intelligence that's really good at flying a plane, but it probably wouldn't be good at driving a car. So this is a perfect example here of these are attackers attacking artificial intelligence systems, right? So this image scanning software can recognize a person, but simply putting a multicolored picture there tricks the artificial intelligence. So the great thing is that we have artificial intelligence available to cybersecurity professionals, and it comes down to automation. It comes down to massive data processing so that artificial intelligence models can look at a wide range of devices on your network, and it can identify certain patterns. But as I said before, the bad thing is that the bad guys are also using it as well. So AI basically helps the defenders. It makes the attackers' attacks worse. So both sides are basically leveraging it, and it's cops and robbers games. Who could go forward faster? This is a little bit about ThoughtAI. We're actually building this required infrastructure on top of the internet. So we're putting the rules in place. We've got basically, we take data, we ingest it, we convert it into an intelligent agent, and that intelligent agent actually knows what it's supposed to do and where it's supposed to go. So it makes artificial intelligence incredibly more efficient and secure. So with that, I'll wrap up, and I think we've got some time for questions. Thank you very much.
Want to grab the phone or can I hear? You hear? Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew. I don't know if you have, because I have several questions. You can start so far in Monday, but we have your solution. Okay. That's great. Okay. Yeah, the first question was, given the current status of cybersecurity, from what I understood from the presentation, it's always a game of moving target.
Right.
Any vendor promises fail-safe cyber security is and so my question will be, at this point, would you recommend a private company or small company that does not have the need for, let's say, employees or other stakeholders to have online contact with it? Would there be like anything you can think of that you would recommend them not to have the full data online or like make a selection of what goes online? Because currently the trend of all the vendors is put everything online.
Yeah.
You know? Which, I mean, there's data that I feel is like aggregates of data. They're not individualized, and it's great to have online. But for example, I'm in the lawyer division, and there is some data that we have not placed online. We still use client privilege, very important. At some stages, the case, we still keep it in hard copy and physical deliveries and so on. Maybe it's extreme. But anyways, and my other question was, I saw a brief mention of what the artificial intelligence project for ThoughtAI was, and I was wondering if you tell us, given from, well, within a week, what have you seen about, maybe you've been to other Latin American countries? What is the status of cybersecurity from what you've seen here in Panama, perhaps other places in Latin America? And how can other IT companies work alongside what ThoughtAI developing and promoting?
Great. Thank you so much for those questions. Okay, so let's start from the top. So
it's not to put on.
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, you said they're a silver bullet essentially, right? Is there one company they're all promising, that they can completely secure your network? And the answer is false, right? Yeah, technology moves too fast. Definitely moving target. Another way to look at it is that there's no way to validate that any cybersecurity vendor solution has any effectiveness. You don't know it, in fact. Having a layered approach using lots of different technologies and probably, certainly never rely on one vendor, right? It's good to kind of spread that around. Yeah, and as far as, putting your data online, actually, that is the best cybersecurity solution I ever heard.
Yeah.
Keep it on paper, right? That's known as air gap, right? Where, literally you're not connecting it to the internet. If it's that important, yeah, certainly, having that information under lock and key within your organization and not putting it anywhere less secure is certainly, a perfect strategy to that. I mean, really even just, understanding what is the most data, it's so important. And then the third piece was about
ThoughtAI. What have you seen in cybersecurity in Latin America?
Right.
How can IT companies work alongside?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I unfortunately have not been to any other countries in the region. I'm sure that will change in the future. From what I can tell from Panama, Panama's government is certainly making the right moves as start as law 18 and, starting to put some things out there. They've got an EU GDPR-based set of recommendations for data privacy. So certainly, starting with regulation is actually very helpful for cybersecurity professionals because, it's something we can actually point to, right? It builds credibility with what we're doing, helps us get more funding. So generally speaking, the fact that Panama is trying to put these things in place, I think, is very important. And as far as ThoughtAI, as I said, we're a startup. I mean, we have all of this technology built. We're looking for funding to actually commercialize it and get it out the door. But right now we have over 20 partnerships with companies where we're starting to build specific solutions for them. So if there are any companies that like the idea of what we're doing, we can collaborate and we can probably start doing concepts and things like that. I mean, we'd love to do that. So, certainly anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Love to work with any and anybody. So, did that answer everything?
Yeah.
Great.
If any of those physically present here have any questions, they can make them in Spanish if it's more comfortable, and I'll translate. So, if there's no questions online, I will do a third question. You mentioned something very interesting, which was the audit of the code. How would you, from your experience, recommend the company that wants to go through that audit process? Who to call? What kind of consultant should I look for? How the process work and the physical installation, walk them through how this audit work?
Right. Yeah, so two parts to that, the question of how do you get started with code reviews? I mean, that's literally what it is that you're actually using tool sets that look for common coding samples that are known to be vulnerable, and it flags them, and then developers can fix them essentially. But the first part is actually starting with educating developers so that they're aware of secure coding practices. Because there are certain ways that as they're writing line by line, they're building things in a way that incorporates that. But even the worst coded piece of software, you can actually, there are vendors, they're called web application or application scanners. There's a lot of tools out there. IBM's a big company. I didn't mean to say they're a big company. They're a company that's big on source code scanning. And yeah, basically it's, before, even as a final check, you can kind of go through and audit and point out places that there are vulnerabilities. So there are those tools available. And there certainly are a lot of companies that will assist with that.
Yes, well, I will do then closing. And I want to thank Andrew Becker for our master class, and also Kevin Huggins for giving us a briefing of the programs that Harrisburg University offers right here in Panama. program for those professionals that are seeking continuing education, especially in science and technology, which is an ever-changing field. And to our viewers, listeners, and those visiting persons here, I want to thank them for attending this presentation. I remind you that the Committee of Trade and Investment has monthly meetings open all employees of member companies of AmCham and their guests. Our next events are listed in panamcham.com website. So the committee section or events section in the menu, and you find it. We try to have a monthly meeting every month, and occasionally we have more than one about subjects as important for companies such as cybersecurity. And with that,